with the rules of procedure, the debate is adjourned and the bill is referred to the House Committee. This Council resumes the second reading debate on the Companies Amendment Bill 2017. Honourable Wong Ting-kwong, Chairman of the Bills Committee on the bill, will address the Council on the committee's report. The Honourable Wong Ting-kwong. Thank you, Madam Deputy. In my capacity as the Chairman of the Bills Committee on the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorist Financing Financial Institutes Amendment Bill 2017 and the Companies Amendment Bill 2017, I submit the report of the Bills Committee to Council and report our deliberation on the Companies Amendment Bill 2017. The purpose of the bill is to amend the Companies Ordinance to require companies incorporated in Hong Kong to keep significant controllers' registers so as to enhance the transparency of beneficial ownership of Hong Kong companies so that it is aligned with the standards of the Financial Action Task Force or FATF. The Bills Committee held 8 meetings to discuss the bill with the administration and to listen to the views of deputations. The Bills Committee generally supports the proposals in the bill so that the anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing regulatory regime of Hong Kong will become consistent with the international standards announced by the FATF. The Bills Committee notes that the bill proposes to add a new division 2A to Part 12 of CO to introduce a SCR and impose various requirements relating to SCR on an applicable company. An applicable company will be required to keep an SCR which must be kept at the company's registered office or a prescribed place in Hong Kong. The SCR must contain information on the significant controllers of an applicable company, namely registrable persons and/or registrable legal entities who have significant control over the company. The CO proposes new Schedule 5A. It sets out the criteria for determining significant control. Applicable companies must take reasonable steps to investigate whether there are significant controllers in the company and also to confirm each significant controller. With regard to exemptions, the definition of applicable company under the proposed new Section 653A of CO does not include listed companies. The Bills Committee has inquired about the rationale for exempting listed companies from the SCR regime and notes that some deputations have suggested providing exemption to other companies, such as companies limited by guarantee. The government has advised that listed companies are exempt from the SCR regime as they are subject to different and a more stringent disclosure regime on beneficial ownership under the Securities and Futures Ordinance. There was no consensus among respondents to the consultation exercise on the CO bill on providing exemption to other types of companies. There is also no strong justification for providing exemption to companies limited by guarantee. Given the unequivocal intention of FATF to catch legal persons of all forms, carving out the various types of companies will undermine the effectiveness of the disclosure regime and run the risk of subjecting these companies to possible abuse. That said, under the proposed new Section 653ZG (1) of CO, FS is empowered to make regulation providing for exemption of a particular type of company or class of companies should such need arise in future. Such regulations will be made by subsidiary legislation subject to the negative vetting procedure of the Legislative Council. In proposing the SCR, the Bills Committee has inquired about the reasonable steps to be taken by applicable companies in identifying the significant controllers and assistance to companies in minimizing their compliance costs. The administration responded that reasonable steps may include examination of relevant documents kept by an applicable company, like its articles of association and register of members. In order to assist applicable companies in complying with the various requirements relating to SCR, the company's registry will provide guidelines regarding the keeping of SCR and develop specified forms for use by companies. The CR will also launch publicity campaigns and set up an inquiry hotline on the new requirements to enhance the understanding of the public and companies on the new beneficial ownership regime. The Bills Committee also discussed the access to the significant controllers registers. According to the bill, an applicable company is required to make available its SCR for inspection upon demand by law enforcement officers. The proposed new section 653(b)(1) sets out the list of law enforcement officers permitted to inspect SCRs. The Bills Committee notes that while some deputations support allowing inspections of SCRs by law enforcement officers only, some deputations consider that information on the beneficial ownership of companies should be kept in CR's public register and be available for public inspection. As regards the list of law enforcement officers, with a view to facilitating the discharge of functions relating to companies, a member proposed adding officers of the Labor Department and the Military Provident Fund Schemes Authority to the list. The administration responded that the majority of the respondents to the consultation exercise supported the proposals of requiring a company to keep the SCR at the company's registered office or a prescribed place in Hong Kong, and allowing only competent authorities to access the SCR. Having regard to privacy concern, compliance costs, international practices, and FATF recommendations, the government considers it appropriate to restrict access to SCR by law enforcement officers only. The administration also points out that the law enforcement officers list has also been drawn up carefully, and these are officers who perform functions under the law of Hong Kong that are related to the prevention, detection, or investigation of money laundering or terrorist financing matters. To cater for future needs, the FS may make regulation to specify any other department or agency of the government or any other statutory body. Such regulation will be subsidiary legislation subject to the scrutiny of LegCo under the negative vetting procedure. The government will keep in view implementation of the new regime and review the specified list whenever necessary to ensure that it is in keeping with law enforcement needs. The Bills Committee will not propose any CSAs to the bill. It supports the resumption of second reading debate of the bill. Madam Deputy, I will now speak on the bill about my own views. The administration proposes the bill, and the objective of the bill is to act in accordance with the requirement of the FATF to enhance the transparency of beneficial ownership of Hong Kong companies, so that the AML and CTF regulatory regime will be brought in line with the international standards announced by the FATF. The purpose of the bill is to implement Hong Kong's responsibility as one of the members of the international community in combating money laundering. But Hong Kong will benefit from the discharge of this international duty, and we will not just get an applause. The bill requires all companies, apart from listed companies, to set up an SCR, and it stipulates the beneficial owners or significant controllers, so that when necessary, law enforcement agencies will be able to get access and inspect the SCR. To identify the beneficial owners or significant controllers of a company will prevent unscrupulous elements who can hide their own identities by setting up shell companies in order to launder money or to help finance terrorists or involve in other illegal acts. Enforcement agencies will be able to track down on these people and their true identities. This will enhance Hong Kong's status in terms of financial security and social security. At the same time, the bill stipulates that only law enforcement officers can inspect the SCR when necessary. Public members or members of the public will not be able to inspect such information arbitrarily. So members of the public cannot seek to know such information when there is not a need to do so. This will help the companies and beneficial owners and significant controllers to protect their privacy. So we are stepping up regulation. We are stepping up with law enforcement, but we are also striking a balance of that against privacy. So I think the bill worth support. During the scrutiny period, some members of the public spoke on beneficial ownership and also definitions of significant controllers. They raised questions about these. Say, for example, there may be family group companies, there may be beneficial owners or significant controllers in these companies, but these people may be replaced by the senior members of the family at any time, and also they may be influenced in their action by the senior members of the company of the family. Such senior members of the family have not entered into any agreement about share or stock control with the significant controllers. So who are the significant controllers or people with beneficial ownership under the law? I hope later on, after the bill is enacted and when it commences operation, the administration should provide relevant guidelines to expressly define significant controllers and beneficial owners, so companies can follow those rules. Madam Deputy, so I speak. DAB and myself support the bill. Thank you.
Mr. James To. Madam Deputy, regarding the company's amendment bill and also the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorist Financing Financial Institutions Amendment Bill 2017, which in a moment we will also look at, have to do with what happened in the past 8 to 10 years. International financial organizations have been monitoring the global trend. After the 9/11 incident, we have anti-terrorism efforts, and many advanced economies in the world believe that they have high tax rates, and that accounts for capital flowing out to other tax havens, leading to tax revenue forgone as well as insufficient tax information obtained. So we have the international organizations, and Hong Kong, in fact, was once chair of this Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, although we are just a city. Of course, we understand that Hong Kong is an international city with a low tax regime, and we only charge tax on income generated locally. We have a free flow of capital. And also in our neighboring economies, such as the mainland, it enjoys vibrant economic growth, etc. So definitely, Hong Kong is bound to be a tax haven for capital. I recall years ago in international conferences, Hong Kong was the subject of allegations. We almost got put on the blacklist. And then I recall the then president, Mr. Hu Jintao, talked to the French president and asked that a second chance be given. And it was quite a mess. Anyhow, because of various reasons and the unique regimes in Hong Kong, indeed, money from other more advanced economies are parked in Hong Kong. And this is just the inevitable international trend. And there aren't many places which would dare to go against this trend, because we have the United States, EU, exerting influence, compelling other places to follow their order. No economy would dare to disobey or to deliberately delay the implementation. So it is a game of power. Well, if Hong Kong has autonomy in making decisions, would we implement it or not? I think in the face of global pressure, we would do it anyway. Anyway, in the past decade, we have been given more and more international obligations, and we're subject to mutual evaluation, etc. I think the fundamental principle we should adhere to is to comply with the minimum requirements. I don't mean being perfunctory. I don't mean that we should be a money laundering center for the world. I don't think we should attract under the table deals and unscrupulous activities to Hong Kong. What I mean is, there are unique factors in each economy, and each economy also subject to the neighboring environment. So let's say if we are required to implement 5 requirements, and if we walk the extra mile and implement 6 or 10 instead, it will be disadvantageous as far as we are concerned. And we should have confidence in our system. For example, for any money laundering and counter-terrorist financing, we must have faith in our system. It is a good system, and I'm not suggesting that we should be irresponsible as a member of this global village. I'm not suggesting that we should allow unscrupulous activities to take place in Hong Kong. But we do have a sound system. And we have indeed implemented different measures to achieve this purpose. Maybe not in a way of enacting legislation, but perhaps self-discipline by the professions and implementation of guidelines in sectors. We have those. So when an international organization conducts a checkup on us and suggests that we should follow a checklist of requirements because we are not good enough, My stance is that we do the minimum requirements. But the Hong Kong government, the professions, and the electrical members must bear in mind not to walk the extra mile, because there is no merit to be gained if we do. If we walk the extra mile, the only consequence is that within the short term, our competitive edge will be lost, and there will also be additional burden on the well-established system, so that compliance costs will substantially increase, eating into our competitiveness. And we'll be losing out to our competitors. That's why we should draw a line. Every time I ask the government for details, and honestly, Madam Deputy, I do keep a close eye on these minute details, because this is an issue close to my heart, and I also have more than a decade's experience. So in every exercise, I would ask the government whether this is the minimum charge or the minimum requirement. Sometimes the government would say yes. Sometimes the government would say that these are appropriate requirements, albeit not minimum. And then I would ask the follow-up question. So what are the minimum requirements? Why shouldn't we just follow the minimum requirements? Why should we do more and still consider it appropriate? And I'll be very careful in grilling the government, because, for example, for the details of these two bills, let's say record-keeping requirements, if the organization suggests that record up to 5 or 6 years should be kept, and if we insist that records of up to 6 or 7 years should be kept, I don't think we need to keep an extra year's record. Well, does it incur a lot of costs? Not necessarily, but my perception is for members who have spoken in this council before, and there are also those members who do not speak often on these matters because they rely on the knowledge of other members. Perhaps they do not have the resources or the manpower within their small political party to go through all the details. Well, as far as members who have spoken on this before, they agree with this basic principle. It's not just a matter of a period of 6 months or 1 year. But I believe this is a departure of the principle, and then it will be problematic because, first of all, it will not be in the interest of Hong Kong, and second, this will be an endless exercise. If we look at the government's electoral brief, you will see that all similar bills will keep coming, because we're only focusing on the key requirements. That means there are more requirements to follow. We'll need to constantly update the ordinance. And apparently, the reason is there are countries who would like to tighten the rules and put in more details, not for the purpose of combating terrorism. If we take a look at advanced economies around the world, they are printing money, but they do not get a lot of tax in extra. When their tax revenue is eroded, they would then find ways to get more money, to an extent that if they suspect a jurisdiction of getting investment from the tax residents in their jurisdiction, they would impose additional requirements. The other point is this. I really need to be frank. For these international organizations, it's bureaucratic. They have officials doing their duties, and because of their status, because of the duties, they are required to conduct a comprehensive check around the world, and of course, every time they would discover inadequacies. In each check, they would always find loopholes that should be plugged. Madam Deputy, I'm giving such a lengthy speech because I like to appeal to members that if we have this consensus in this chamber regarding the principle I mentioned, and over the years I think a lot of members have already understood my point, and I think this is a consensus reached across the political spectrum. I hope that the government would heed our view, and if the government also decides to adopt the same standard in the future negotiation with the counterparts around the world, the government should bear in mind that there is a strong backing from elected members with a public mandate, so that you will have bargaining power. But of course, despite your bargaining efforts, if the other party still accuses us of unscrupulous activities and want to put us on the blacklist, then at least we can buy time. We will not be losing out to our competitors immediately, so that our local entities will not need to go through the trouble of adjusting to these requirements and the principles that are constantly being updated. Finally, Madam Deputy, I'm going to support this resumption and the third reading of the bill. But I'd like to focus on a number of points. The government suggests that we need to implement this new measure. This is the SCR, Significant Controllers Register, in order to meet the international obligations. However, this is only accessible by government departments, meaning law enforcement agencies such as the police and the Customs and Excise Department. In the scrutiny of the bill, some members have suggested, say, the Labor Department, etc., that should also have access. Say if something really out of line happens in relation to wages or the MPF contributions, there is no reason to turn the government departments away simply because of privacy. If you are turning the public away, you can still pin it on privacy, but not government departments. So to say that the Labor Department and the MPFA should not have access to the register because of privacy of data, well, I will not be confrontational, but I don't know the stance of the labor sector. But there is another layer of meaning to this bill. Well, in the past, when we come across legislation in relation to disclosure of information, data collection, etc., it has a great bearing on the anti-corruption effort by the mainland authorities. After passage of bills in the past, what I discovered is that originally the request for exchange of information has come from an overseas counterpart, but in fact, the mainland authority can also, under this mechanism, obtain information in relation to entities or individuals who are suspected of facilitating capital outflow or corruption. And this would greatly facilitate the anti-grafting work of the mainland. This bill is also falls in this category. Well, I strongly support the mainland authorities' effort in combating corruption, but this is perhaps a side effect.
Dr. K.K. Kwok, Madam Deputy, I speak in support of the Companies Amendment Bill 2017. As the bill proposes, the amendment is to tackle anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing. I believe in Hong Kong, there is money laundering, depending how you define money laundering. As you know, corruption is rampant on the mainland. You can see that Hong Kong's real property is very much speculated, and one of the sources of the revenue is from the mainland. Under the rule of Mr. Xi Jinping, the administration in China said that they would combat corruption and they would make an all-out effort to combat the outflow of capital. But people have found ways to counter that since the assumption of power of Mr. Xi Jinping. If you look at Hong Kong and Europe and the Americas, mainland capital has been flowing to these places continuously. According to statistics on the mainland, foreign exchange reserve can reach 10,000 billion US dollars. It's a very big sum. Hong Kong is the first stepping stone for the outflow of capital from the mainland, and Hong Kong is a very important base for money laundering. And Hong Kong has become the place for many corrupt officials from the mainland and also enterprises that work against the interests of the country. And Madam Deputy, we do not have so many terrorists in Hong Kong. I believe when terrorists get financing, they have many choices. They might not choose Hong Kong. So if we make use of the amendment bill to combat money laundering, I support it. But can the bill really help to combat money laundering from the mainland? I have doubts about this. I don't doubt the original intent of the bill, but if you look at the situation in Hong Kong, we often hear about capital from the mainland with dubious sources. Billions of dollars can be used to make acquisitions. And of course, I'm talking about a major office property sold by Ting-kwong Holdings. A number of small investors have come up with billions of dollars in order to buy up the entire office building in Central in Hong Kong. It's very difficult for you to trace the source of the money. Maybe the administration in Hong Kong wants to, and also international financial institutions would like our departments and bureaus in the financial field to make Hong Kong a clean place for investment. But if you tell people that Hong Kong is such a place, I am sure foreign countries will not agree. The paper says that Hong Kong doesn't have any casinos like Macau. Macau is a gambling center. It's easy for people to launder money there. You can go to VIP rooms in casinos. You can exchange money for a check from the casino or for gambling chips, and the money will be laundered. That is a public secret, an open secret. But this is not so in Hong Kong. Hong Kong does not have any casinos as such. But there are many places which are like casinos in Hong Kong. We have the stock exchange, which has operated for decades. The Hong Kong Exchange has the Hong Kong government as its major or majority shareholder, and it is saying that we should put an end to inappropriate speculation. Because, of course, small investors would stand to lose. But the stock exchange is almost like a casino. And this bill also seeks to do something about trust or administrators and accountants. And there will be new powers to regulate estate agents as well. But our property market is almost like a casino as well. Property is an investment tool, and it can also be a tool for money laundering, and we are famous for that internationally. We know that capital keeps flowing from the mainland, and Hong Kong is the place with the highest prices in property, and an average person has to put away all the money he earns without eating or drinking for 19.4 years before he can own a property in Hong Kong. Therefore, I hope the bill will be able to combat money laundering, especially with regard to capital from the mainland. However, I doubt whether the bill can really achieve its purpose. If money still flows from state-owned enterprises or corrupt officials from the mainland, I don't know what the bill can do about it. The bill does not have enough powers to combat this. And on the other hand, I'd like to talk about law enforcement. We all know that we emphasize law enforcement, but not so on the mainland. The mainland emphasizes the making of laws. But law enforcement is actually a door opened for corrupt officials to make more money. In Hong Kong, law enforcement should be an important tool for combating money laundering. But even after the passing of the bill, I can't see the administration putting in more resources in order to achieve the purpose of the bill. On the other hand, this is a bill to combat money laundering and also terrorist financing. Now, of course, I support it, but I have this worry whether the bill will be manipulated by the administration in order to combat organizations and companies it doesn't like. The SARG today may not be acting like the mainland to engage in selective law enforcement. For the time being, it is not taking targeted law enforcement action against companies or individuals it doesn't like. It is not making use of laws or even this bill to do search in premises. Now, but this bill empowers law enforcement agencies to do that. And this is worrying. As long as they have the query, law enforcement agencies will be able to make use of statutory powers to search premises. I don't want to equate such powers with Article 23 of the Basic Law, but if you remember, the discussion then about Article 23 was about excessive powers, including the power of search. Members expressed a lot of reservation towards that. When the bill is enacted, will the administration invoke the ordinance in order to crack down on dissidents? I have this worry. We see that the SARG is listening more and more to Beijing. It is engaged in more and more selective law enforcement. It has been asking people to accommodate others, and even the CE is asking us to accommodate the non-enforcement of the law on certain people. By the same token, are we accommodating or condoning law enforcement agencies which can use these statutory powers to search premises like companies and organizations which they say are engaged in money laundering? As Mr. James Toh was saying, he has worries about certain details in the bill. I share his view. In our scrutiny of the bill, we have not talked about how to make sure that law enforcement will still be impartial and fair. I hope the civil service system, especially civil servants with law enforcement powers, will stand firm in their position by acting fairly and impartially. We do not want them to make use of these new and statutory powers to engage in political censorship and political suppression. I shall not object to the original intent of the bill, meaning that this bill is to combat money laundering, especially money with a dubious source. But if we can't really do this, and that is to prevent Hong Kong from being used as a base for money laundering from the mainland, especially by the rich and powerful of the mainland. Rather, if Beijing can go through Hong Kong's law enforcement agencies in order to crack down on individuals, companies, or organizations that Beijing doesn't like, then I will be very worried. I hope Hong Kong will remain politically neutral. I hope such laws will allow Hong Kong to become a more mature, fair and just society. And such laws and immense powers in them should not be used to combat or crack down on people who disagree with the government. So I speak.
Mr. Dennis Kwok.
I understand the purpose of the bill is to fulfill Hong Kong's international obligation under the Financial Action Task Force, known as FATF. In particular, the bill is to impose statutory obligations on professional industries, professional qualified persons, such as solicitors, accountants, real estate agents, and trust company service providers. I certainly support, for the record, that Hong Kong, as an international financial center handling numerous transactions with huge amounts of sums involved, must have in place a strong and effective anti-money laundering regime and counter-terrorist financing regime. And to that effect, I support the administration's effort to continue to have an effective anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist regime in place. I understand this is part of our international effort to combat money laundering and terrorist financing activities, and I recognize that this is the purpose of the bill and it is the intention behind the administration. However, I wish to point out certain issues and difficulties that the bill may pose to members of the legal profession. First, let me explain that the solicitor profession has long adopted a lawful, detailed and effective anti-money laundering regime with effective controls before the enactment of this bill. In fact, I could go as far as to say that members of the legal profession is one of the pioneers of anti-money laundering regime in Hong Kong, as one of the first professional classes to do so, and that we have always been extremely responsible and diligent when it comes to anti-money laundering matters. And I wish the administration would recognize our effort in that respect. The Law Society issued its Practice Direction P in 2007, setting out the practice and guidelines that law firms and solicitors have to follow when handling client monies. This is a comprehensive set of anti-money laundering regulations where a breach of this practice direction will amount to disciplinary conduct that would be subject to discipline by the Law Society. So members of the legal profession has always been very careful in observing anti-money laundering rules and regulations as contained in Practice Direction P. As reiterated by the Law Society in recent times, the Practice Direction P satisfies the FATF recommendations on CDD and record keeping. But I understand there may be differences of opinion when it comes to the actual contents of Practice Direction P. But that is the official position of the Law Society, that Practice Direction P, the implementation of Practice Direction P and the enforcement has already enabled the legal profession for the past 10 years or so to keep up with international standards, and we are mindful of our obligations as professionals when it comes to anti-money laundering.
等一等，郭榮鏗議員。
主席，規程問題。
A point of order, Mr. Holden Chow. With due respect, Madam Chair, Mr. Dennis Kwok was in fact referring to the next bill in his speech as the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorist Financing FI Amendment Bill 2017. He will have plenty of time to do so, but we are still discussing the Companies Amendment Bill 2017. Can you please remind Mr. Dennis Kwok to focus on the register for significant controllers as well. Mr. Dennis Kwok, we are now in the second reading debate of the AML and CTF bill.
Deliberating on. But if you have followed the development of the two bills, they are interrelated and they have one purpose in mind, which is to combat anti-money laundering activities in Hong Kong as part of our international effort to fulfill the requirements set by the Financial Action Task Force and to ensure that we have a local domestic regime that is effective in countering anti-money laundering and also terrorist activities. However, I think the drafting of the company's bill and the drafting of what is known as AMLO are, as we all know, interconnected. And in fact, during the Bills Committee, it has been jointly deliberated upon, and the administration is fully aware of the issues that I'm about to speak on. But in order to cut short the debate that we have had before, I would reserve some of my remarks on the AMLO bill for the latter part of the discussion. But I would like to highlight that for the law society and the legal profession, we've always been extremely cooperative with the administration on matters regarding anti-money laundering activities, and we've always followed the letter and spirit of the law when it comes to anti-money laundering regime. As a matter of substance, as I said, the Practice Direction P that has been imposed by the Law Society on its member is largely effective. As a matter of form, it is backed by law and is enforceable. And the courts have determined that Practice Direction P is a protocol of good practice, which members of the legal profession will no doubt follow. Now, there are specific issues regarding the drafting of AMLO, which I would not discuss here. I would leave those issues when we deliberate upon on that bill. But I would like to point out that the two bills are interconnected, because if you step up on the requirements on the disclosure of companies and their ultimate beneficial ownership, even though it is only limited to law enforcement agency, it would still enhance Hong Kong as a jurisdiction when it comes to anti-money laundering requirements, and that would help law enforcement agency to detect that companies that has been put on a list of concerns or has been suspected of being used for anti-money laundering purposes or countering terrorist financing purposes, then those companies would be more effectively monitored by the law enforcement agency in question. Acting President, the Companies Ordinance empowered the law enforcement agencies to look into and to inquire as to the list of ultimate beneficial owners regarding companies that are incorporated and registered in Hong Kong. Now, that is a step forward. We wish that the administration would have adopted a more progressive effort in opening up the list of ultimate beneficial information to the wider public, because that is also a matter of transparency that some jurisdictions, such as the United Kingdom, have adopted. It may be something that we have to look into in the future as a further step of reform. But I understand that an administration's position is to balance the status quo with the some of the existing commercial interest in Hong Kong, so as to take a good balancing act between law enforcement agency and the need for them to investigate companies, and the Hong Kong's status as a commercial center. However, I note that in the list of law enforcement agencies, there is missing the Competition Commission, which we wish that the administration would not overlook, because the Competition Commission is an important law enforcement agency in the area of competition ordinance. And for them to effectively investigate companies, their interrelationship, their connection, and the possible collusion, it is very important for the Competition Commission to have access to the list of ultimate beneficial owners behind companies. So I do not know why the Commission has been left out of the list, but they are an important law enforcement agency, and they should be so included in the list of law enforcement agencies who would have access or the power to access ultimate beneficial owners. So I wish the administration would address that point so that the members of the Competition Commission would have the comfort that they would be one of the law enforcement agency who would have the power to, in the future, to be included in this list, and who would have the power to access this information. I believe that would greatly assist their investigation efforts in Hong Kong, where we only have a young competition regime, that we need to empower the relevant authority to be able to use that information. I note that the Insurance Authority has been included in this list, and there's no reason why the Competition Commission should not be also included. Acting President, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kenneth Leung. Thank you, Madam Deputy. This is the Companies Amendment Bill 2017. The objective of the bill is to allow Hong Kong to fulfill its international obligation as a member of FATF to amend CAP 266 Companies Ordinance so that entities incorporated in Hong Kong should be required to keep a significant controllers register of the company, SCR, to enhance the transparency of the ultimate beneficial ownership of a company. As a professional accountant, we support the amendment bill, and we also support the overall effort to combat anti-money laundering. For CAP 622 Schedule 5A in the bill, there are minimum standards which sets out the criteria for keeping SCR, and that is for the entities holding 25% of the issued shares in the company, holding directly or indirectly more than 25% of the voting rights in the company, and having the right to exercise or actually exercising significant influence or control over the company. I hope the company registry can give us more concrete example as to exercise significant influence or control over the company. For example, a shareholder may have an actual 5% holding of the shares of the company, but because of the special class and rights of the shares, the shareholder may have significant influence over the company, although the actual share percentage is just 5%. So there are different share structure of companies. Is very common in the business sector. Our professional body hopes that after passage of the bill, more guidelines can be given. According to the 653X in the bill, it sets out a list of law enforcement agencies which have access to the significant controllers registered. Recall during the consultation exercise a few years ago, there was a suggestion that the public should also have access to the SCR. Of course, this will enhance the public's right to know. And it will also be an important source of information for the media. In other common law jurisdictions such as the UK, the public has access to the SCR. However, ultimately, regarding this bill, we set up the list from A to H of law enforcement agencies which have access to the SCR. According to the government's explanation, they need to strike a balance between the operational costs of companies and protection of privacy. Yet, if this is so crucial to our international reputation and implementation and the effectiveness of the AML-CTF laws, I think we should eventually make this register accessible by the public. Say subject to certain conditions. For example, the member of the public should provide the identity documents on request before access is granted, because the access to such information may lead to some illegal activities. This can also come with a small fee, say $1 or $2, and this is only understandable that a charge be imposed. However, if only law enforcement agencies have access to the SCR, I wonder this is an exhaustive and comprehensive list of LEAs. I don't think so, in fact. And in the Bills Committee, I also suggested that the government put on the list other departments such as the Labour Department, the MPF Authority, and Mr. Dennis Kwok just now also mentioned the Competition Commission. In short, regarding anti-money laundering, Hong Kong is an international financial center, and we must fulfill this international obligation to maintain our status as an international financial center. I support the resumption of second reading of the bill. I also urge members to support this bill. I so submit, Madam Deputy.
炳議員。
主席，我發言係支持2017年公司修訂條例草案嘅二讀。喺呢一節嘅發言我會集中係講公司修訂條例草案，而關於打擊洗錢及恐怖分子資金籌集嘅條例修訂草案我會按照我哋立法會嘅。
I will speak on the Companies Amendment Bill 2017, and I leave the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorist Financing Financial Institutions Amendment Bill 2017 when we come to that bill. As Mr. Ting-kwong, the chairman of the Bills Committee, was saying, we are acting in accordance with the requirements of the FATF. We, as an international financial center, we have to follow the pace of the international community. And in order to respond to the requirement of anti-money laundering, the FATF has issued new requirements. The bill targets the disclosure or a register for significant controllers. This is also to comply with the requirements of the FATF to preserve our status and reputation as an international financial center. I believe it is correct for us to walk in tandem with the international community. However, I like to say that at the scrutiny stage in the Bills Committee, I myself and other members raised certain views, one of which was that when we seek to comply with the requirements of FATF on anti-money laundering, if there is to be any change to our laws or to make it plain, and if we want to make our laws stricter, we have to act with caution and not overdo it. Because if we overdo it, it may do damage to Hong Kong's business environment. In fact, we have heard SMEs say for a period in the past that it looks like the SARG has done a lot to combat money laundering, but it is possible that there could be over-regulation. And the example is people cannot open a bank account. I won't go into the details here, Madam Deputy, but on this bill, and we are talking about the SCR, I think there is one very important point, and I hope members will think about it. At the Bills Committee, we already clearly stated our view, and that is that this SCR, if people want to gain access to it, we are still of the view that the company's registry and also law enforcement officers listed in the bill should be able to inspect it instead of making it public for public inspection. In this regard, Madam Deputy, I need to say that this is something about personal privacy. At the Bills Committee, our members raised the same point, and that is, if we do this about the SCR, in other words, the revelation of the identification of the real owners of a company, and if that is made public, then there will be people who would make use of this to achieve other purposes. Therefore, if we look at this from the perspective of anti-money laundering, and if we are talking about cracking down on crimes, I am of the view that the SCR should be inspected by the company's registry and law enforcement agencies only. If today it is to be made public for public inspection, I am afraid we may go against the principle of protecting privacy. I like to state this view here. At the same time, as I said at the outset, when we make a policy or change a law, we must consider whether there will be a negative effect generated. Secondly, the compliance cost. As you know, when there is a new law, companies or other people have to comply with the new law, and there may be new manpower or procedures that need to be put in place. During scrutiny of the bill, I said that we should clarify with the administration, and that is when a notice is issued to a company for it to disclose information about any change of significant controllers, the registration should be done within 7 days. Well, the administration clarified that it is not that you have to register the new significant controller within 7 days. I said that should not be the case because you wouldn't know whether a significant controller would do the registration without notifying you, and then you might be too strict with the regulation. The administration clarified that when a notice is issued to the particular person, then you will have to update the register only when you receive a reply from that person. I think that would be more proper, and also you would not wrongly take companies to task. Madam Deputy, I speak in support of the Companies Amendment Bill 2017. I support its second reading. Later on, I will speak on the AML and CTF Financial Institutions Amendment Bill 2017, so I speak.
Does any member wish to speak? If not, I call upon the Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury to reply. Then the debate will come to a close. Secretary. Madam Deputy, first, I wish to thank Mr. Ting-kwong, Chairman of the BC, and members of the Bills Committee, and also the Secretariat of the Council. Thanks to their efforts, the scrutiny of the Companies Amendment Bill 2017 has been completed. The purpose of the bill seeks to enhance transparency on beneficial ownership of companies in Hong Kong to strengthen our regulatory system to combat money laundering and terrorist financing, to honor our obligation as a member of the FATF. The FATF was established in 1989 to set international standards on combating money laundering and preventing terrorist financing. As a member of the FATF and an international financial center, Hong Kong has the obligation to work with the international community to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. Although we have generally put in place a strong and effective AML and CTF system, international standards have evolved quickly because of the changing financial market and security landscapes. There are certain key deficiencies in our AML and CTF regime as against the FATF recommendations. One is the absence of statutory requirement for companies to keep their beneficial ownership information. At present, the company's ordinance require a company incorporated in Hong Kong to disclose its legal ownership, including members, directors, and company secretary, but it does not require a company to keep information about its ultimate beneficial owners. As requested by the FATF, and after consulting the industry and the public, we propose to require companies incorporated in Hong Kong to take reasonable steps to ensure that they maintain information on significant controllers, including natural persons and legal entity, and to issue notices to them and to keep information regarding their identity, and to keep an SCL containing information of these persons for inspection by law enforcement officers as required. Listing companies are exempted from these requirements because there is a more stringent regime under the Securities and Futures Ordinance. All listed companies are required to keep a register of interest in shares. The bill require all applicable companies to identify and confirm their significant controllers. Significant controllers are to be classified into two groups. One consists of registrable persons and the other consists of registrable legal entities. A registrable person has a controlling ownership interest. Example, holding more than 25% of the votes or shareholding in a company, or those who exercise control of the company through other means. Furthermore, a legal entity, whether or not it is formed or incorporated in Hong Kong, is a registrable legal entity of an applicable company if it meets the specified conditions and if it is a legal entity immediately above the company in the company's ownership chain. The bill also requires all applicable companies to keep an SCL at their registrable office or prescribed place in Hong Kong. The bill has got prescribed legal or law enforcement officers. They may, for the purpose of the officer's performance under the law of Hong Kong, of a function relating to the prevention, detection, or investigation of ML or TF, demand to inspect the SCR. Dr. Kokaki mentioned his concern about the power of law enforcement officers. I'd like to point out that in the bill, it is already specified. It has got a list of law enforcement officers. They include those from the Customs Excise, Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Hong Kong Police Force, the Immigration Department, the Inland Revenue Department, the Insurance Authority. They are responsible for prevention, detection, and investment of ML and TF. These law enforcement officers cannot seek to inspect the SCR lightly. They can only do so for the purpose of preventing, detecting, or investigating of ML and TF. Mr. James Till, Mr. Dennis Kwok, and Mr. Kenneth Leung and Mr. Holden Chow mentioned their views on the SCR. I'd like to point out here that the list in the bill has been set up very cautiously. We've only included members of the company registrar and also law enforcement officers that are under the law of Hong Kong required to carry a function relating to the prevention, detection, investigation of ML and TF. We've also empowered the FS to make rules. He can make rules to designate a certain government departments or organization or another public body to be on the list. We will monitor the implementation of the bill, and we will also, when necessary, review the list of LEO in the bill and make necessary adjustment. To enhance public understanding of the bill, the company registry will later on launch a series of publicity and education activities, and they will include briefings, sending letters to companies, hand out pamphlets, and setting up hotline. The company registry will also issue guidelines as required by the bill to assist applicable companies to transit to the new regime. The FATF is among the very few organizations Hong Kong participates as an independent member. Given that the whole world is committed to combating ML and TF, Hong Kong, as an international member of the international community, must take the FATF recommendations very seriously by enhancing our regulatory regime. Hong Kong is scheduled to undergo a mutual evaluation in 2018-19. These amendments are most important to our honoring our international obligations under the FATF, and will also help to lower the risk of ML and TF by our enterprises. This will safeguard our reputation as an international financial center and a safe and clean city for doing business. The bill has the support of the Bills Committee, and from what I heard from members who have spoken, they are supportive of the bill. Therefore, I urge that the bill be passed by this Council. Thank you, Madam Deputy.
I now put the question to you that the Companies Amendment Bill 2017 be read the second time. Will those in favour please raise their hands? Those against please raise their hands. I declare the motion. The question is agreed by a majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed. Companies Amendment Bill 2017. Council now becomes Committee of the Whole Council.